How do we approach the study of Muad'Dib's father? A man of surpassing warmth and surprising coldness was the Duke Leto Atreides. Yet many facts open the way to this Duke: his abiding love for his Bene Gesserit lady, the dreams he held for his son, the devotion with which men served him. You see him there, a man snared by destiny, a lonely figure with his light dimmed behind the glory of his son. Still, one must ask, what is the son but an extension of the father? From Muad'Dib, Family Commentaries by the Princess Irulan.
Paul watched his father enter the training room, saw the guards take up stations outside. One of them closed the door. As always, Paul experienced a sense of presence in his father, someone totally here. The Duke was tall, olive-skinned. His thin face held harsh angles warmed only by deep, grey eyes. He wore a black working uniform with red armorial hawk crest at the breast. A silvered shield belt with the patina of much use girded his narrow waist.
Hard at work, son?
He crossed to the L table, glanced at the papers on it, swept his gaze around the room and back to Paul. He felt tired, filled with the ache of not showing his fatigue. I must use every opportunity to rest during the crossing to Arrakis, he thought. There'll be no rest on Arrakis.
Not very hard. Everything's so...
Yes. Well, tomorrow we leave. It'll be good to get settled in our new home. Put all this upset behind.
Paul nodded, suddenly overcome by memory of the Reverend Mother's words. For the father, nothing.
Father, will Arrakis be as dangerous as everyone says?
The Duke forced himself to the casual gesture, sat down on a corner of the table, smiled. A whole pattern of conversation welled up in his mind, the kind of thing he might use to dispel the vapors in his men before a battle. The pattern froze before it could be vocalized, confronted by the single thought, "This is my son."
It'll be dangerous.
Howard tells me we have a plan for the Fremen.
Paul wondered, why don't I tell him what that old woman said? How did she seal my tongue? The Duke noted his son's distress.
As always, Hawat sees the main chance. But there's much more. I see also the Combiné Honnête Aubert Advancer Mercantile, the Chom Company. By giving me Arrakis, His Majesty is forced to give us a Chom directorship. A subtle gain.
Chom controls the spice.
And Arrakis, with its spice, is our avenue into Chom. There's more to Chom than melange.
Did the Reverend Mother warn you?
Paul clenched his fists, feeling his palms slippery with perspiration. The effort it had taken to ask that question.
Hawat tells me she frightened you with warnings about Arrakis. Don't let a woman's fears cloud your mind. No woman wants her loved ones endangered. The hand behind those warnings was your mother's. Take this as a sign of her love for us.
Does she know about the Fremen?
Yes, and about much more.
What?
And the Duke thought, the truth could be worse than he imagines. But even dangerous facts are valuable if you've been trained to deal with them. And there's one place where nothing has been spared for my son. Dealing with dangerous facts. This must be leavened, though he is young.
Few products escape the Chom touch. Logs, donkeys, horses, cows, lumber, dung, sharks, whale fur, the most prosaic and the most exotic. Even our poor Pundi rice from Caladan. Anything the Guild will transport. The art forms of Ikaz, the machines of Rechezi and Ix. But all fades before melange. A handful of spice will buy a home on Tupali. It cannot be manufactured. It must be mined on Arrakis. It is unique, and it has true geriatric properties.
And now we control it.
To a certain degree. But the important thing is to consider all the houses that depend on Chom profits. And think of the enormous proportion of those profits dependent upon a single product, the spice. Imagine what would happen if something should reduce spice production.
Whoever had stockpiled melange could make a killing.
Others would be out in the cold.
The Duke permitted himself a moment of grim satisfaction, looking at his son and thinking how penetrating, how truly educated that observation had been. He nodded.
The Harkonnens have been stockpiling for more than 20 years.
They mean spice production to fail and you to be blamed.
They wish the Atreides name to become unpopular. Think of the Landsraad houses that look to me for a certain amount of leadership. Their unofficial spokesman. Think how they'd react if I were responsible for a serious reduction in their income. After all, one's own profits come first. The great convention be damned. You can't let someone pauperize you.
A harsh smile twisted the Duke's mouth.
They'd look the other way, no matter what was done to me.
Even if we were attacked with atomics?
Nothing that flagrant. No open defiance of the convention, but almost anything else short of that. Perhaps even dusting and a bit of soil poisoning.
Then why are we walking into this?
Paul, knowing where the trap is, that's the first step in evading it. This is like single combat, son, only on a larger scale. A feint within a feint within a feint, seemingly without end. The task is to unravel it. Knowing that the Harkonnens stockpile melange, we ask another question. Who else is stockpiling? That's the list of our enemies.
Who?
Certain houses we knew were unfriendly, and some we'd thought friendly. We need not consider them for the moment, because there is one other much more important. Our beloved Padishah Emperor.
Paul tried to swallow in a throat suddenly dry.
Couldn't you convene the Landsraad? Expose...
Make our enemy aware we know which hand holds the knife? Ah, now, Paul, we see the knife now. Who knows where it might be shifted next? If we put this before the Landsraad, it'd only create a great cloud of confusion. The Emperor would deny it. Who could gainsay him? All we'd gain is a little time while risking chaos. And where would the next attack come from?
All the houses might start stockpiling spice.
Our enemies have a head start. Too much of a lead to overcome.
The Emperor. That means the Sardaukar.
Disguised in Harkonnen livery, no doubt. But the soldier fanatics nonetheless.
How can Fremen help us against Sardaukar?
Did Hawat talk to you about Seleucus Secundus?
The Emperor's prison planet? No.
What if it were more than a prison planet, Paul? There's a question you never hear asked about the Imperial Corps of Sardaukar. Where do they come from?
From the prison planet?
They come from somewhere.
But the supporting levies the Emperor demands from...
That's what we're led to believe. They're just the Emperor's levies, trained young and superbly. You hear an occasional muttering about the Emperor's training cadres, but the balance of our civilization remains the same. The military forces of the Landsraad great houses on one side, the Sardaukar and their supporting levies on the other. And their supporting levies, Paul. The Sardaukar remain the Sardaukar.
But every report on Seleucus Secundus says SS is a hell world.
Undoubtedly. But if you are going to raise tough, strong, ferocious men, what environmental conditions would you impose on them?
How could you win the loyalty of such men?
There are proven ways. Play on the certain knowledge of their superiority, the mystique of secret covenant, the esprit of shared suffering. It can be done. It has been done on many worlds in many times.
Paul nodded, holding his attention on his father's face. He felt some revelation impending.
Consider Arrakis. When you get outside the towns and garrison villages, it's every bit as terrible a place as Seleucia Secundus.
Paul's eyes went wide.
The Fremen!
We have there the potential of a core as strong and deadly as the Sardaukar. It'll require patience to exploit them secretly and wealth to equip them properly. But the Fremen are there, and the spice wealth is there. You see now why we walk into Arrakis, knowing the trap is there.
Don't the Harkonnens know about the Fremen?
The Harkonnens sneered at the Fremen, hunted them for sport, never even bothered trying to count them. We know the Harkonnen policy with planetary populations. Spend as little as possible to maintain them.
The metallic threads in the hawk symbol above his father's breast glistened as the Duke shifted his position.
You see?
We're negotiating with the Fremen right now.
I sent a mission headed by Duncan Idaho. A proud and ruthless man, Duncan, but fond of the truth. I think the Fremen will admire him. If we're lucky, they may judge us by him. Duncan, the moral.
Duncan the moral and Gurney the valorous.
You name them well.
And Paul thought, Gurney's one of those the Reverend Mother meant, a supporter of worlds, the valor of the brave.
Gurney tells me you did well in weapons today.
That isn't what he told me.
I figured Gurney to be sparse with his praise. He says you have a nicety of awareness, in his own words, of the difference between a blade's edge and its tip.
Gurney says there's no artistry in killing with the tip, that it should be done with the edge.
Gurney's a romantic. I'd sooner you never had to kill. But if the need arises, you do it however you can, tip or edge.
The Duke looked up at the skylight, on which the rain was drumming. Seeing the direction of his father's stare, Paul thought of the wet skies out there, a thing never to be seen on Arrakis from all accounts, and this thought of skies put him in mind of the space beyond.
Are the guild ships really big?
The Duke looked at him.
This will be your first time off planet. Yes, they're big. We'll be riding a Highliner because it's a long trip. A Highliner is truly big. Its hold will tuck all our frigates and transports into a little corner. We'll be just a small part of the ship's manifest.
And we won't be able to leave our frigates?
That's part of the price you pay for guild security. There could be Harkonnen ships right alongside us, and we'd have nothing to fear from them. The Harkonnens know better than to endanger their shipping privileges.
I'm going to watch our screens and try to see a guildsman.
You won't. Not even their agents ever see a guildsman. The guild's as jealous of its privacy as it is of its monopoly. Don't do anything to endanger our shipping privileges, Paul.
Do you think they hide because they've mutated and don't look human anymore?
Who knows? It's a mystery we're not likely to solve. We've more immediate problems. Among them, you.
Me?
Your mother wanted me to be the one to tell you, son. You see, you may have mentat capabilities.
Paul stared at his father, unable to speak for a moment. Then,
A mentat? Me? But
Hawat agrees, son. It's true.
But I thought mentat training had to start during infancy and the subject couldn't be told because it might inhibit the early...
Paul broke off, all his past circumstances coming to focus in one flashing computation.
I see.
A day comes when the potential mentat must learn what's being done. It may no longer be done to him. The mentat has to share in the choice of whether to continue or abandon the training. Some can continue. Some are incapable of it. Only the potential mentat can tell this for sure about himself.
Paul rubbed his chin. All the special training from Hawat and his mother, the mnemonics, the focusing of awareness, the muscle control and sharpening of sensitivities, the study of languages and nuances of voices, all of it clicked into a new kind of understanding in his mind.
You'll be the Duke someday, son. A Mentat Duke would be formidable indeed. Can you decide now, or do you need more time?
I'll go on with the training.
Formidable indeed.
Paul saw the proud smile on his father's face. The smile shocked Paul. It had a skull look on the Duke's narrow features. Paul closed his eyes, feeling the terrible purpose reawaken within him. Perhaps being a Mentat is terrible purpose, he thought. But even as he focused on this thought, his new awareness denied it.
With the Lady Jessica and Arrakis, the Bene Gesserit system of sowing implant legends through the Missionaria Protectiva came to its full fruition. The wisdom of seeding the known universe with a prophecy pattern for the protection of Bene Gesserit personnel has long been appreciated, but never have we seen a condition ut extremis with more ideal mating of person and preparation. The prophetic legends had taken on Arrakis, even to the extent of adopted labels, including Reverend Mother, Canto in Respondu, and most of the Sharia Panoplia Propheticus. And it is generally accepted now that the Lady Jessica's latent abilities were grossly underestimated. From Analysis, the Erekine Crisis, by the Princess Irulan. Private Circulation Bene Gesserit File Number AR 81088587.
All around the Lady Jessica, piled in corners of the Arakeen Great Hall, mounded in the open spaces, stood the packaged freight of their lives. Boxes, trunks, cartons, cases, some partly unpacked. She could hear the cargo handlers from the guild shuttle depositing another load in the entry. Jessica stood in the center of the hall. She moved in a slow turn, looking up and around at shadowed carvings, crannies, and deeply recessed windows. This giant anachronism of a room reminded her of the Sisters' Hall at her Bene Gesserit school. But at the school, the effect had been of warmth. Here, all was bleak stone. Some architect had reached far back into history for these buttressed walls and dark hangings, she thought. The arched ceiling stood 2 stories above her, with great crossbeams she felt sure had been shipped here to Arrakis across space at monstrous cost. No planet of this system grew trees to make such beams, unless the beams were imitation wood. She thought not. This had been the government mansion in the days of the old empire. Costs had been of less importance then. It had been before the Harkonnens and their new megalopolis of Carthage, a cheap and brassy place some 200 kilometers northeast across the broken land. Leto had been wise to choose this place for his seat of government. The name, Arakeen, had a good sound, filled with tradition, and this was a smaller city, easier to sterilize and defend. Again there came the clatter of boxes being unloaded in the entry. Jessica sighed. Against a carton to her right stood the painting of the Duke's father. Wrapping twine hung from it like a frayed decoration. A piece of the twine was still clutched in Jessica's left hand. Beside the painting lay a black bull's head mounted on a polished board. The head was a dark island in a sea of wadded paper. Its plaque lay flat on the floor, and the bull's shiny muzzle pointed at the ceiling as though the beast were ready to bellow a challenge into this echoing room. Jessica wondered what compulsion had brought her to uncover those 2 things first, the head and the painting. She knew there was something symbolic in the action. Not since the day when the Duke's buyers had taken her from the school had she felt this frightened and unsure of herself. The head and the picture. They heightened her feelings of confusion. She shuddered, glanced at the slit windows high overhead. It was still early afternoon here, and in these latitudes the sky looked black and cold, so much darker than the warm blue of Caladan. A pang of homesickness throbbed through her. So far away, Caladan.
Here we are.
The voice was Duke Leto's. She whirled, saw him striding from the arched passage to the dining hall. His black working uniform with red armorial hawk crest at the breast looked dusty and rumpled.
I thought you might have lost yourself in this hideous place.
It is a cold house.
She looked at his tallness, at the dark skin that made her think of olive groves and golden sun on blue waters. There was wood smoke in the grey of his eyes, but the face was predatory, thin, full of sharp angles and planes. A sudden fear of him tightened her breast. He had become such a savage, driving person since the decision to bow to the Emperor's command.
The whole city feels cold.
It's a dirty, dusty little garrison town. But we'll change that. These are public rooms for state occasions. I've just glanced at some of the family apartments in the south wing. They're much nicer.
He stepped closer, touched her arm, admiring her stateliness. And again he wondered at her unknown ancestry. A renegade house, perhaps? Some black-barred royalty? She looked more regal than the Emperor's own blood. Under the pressure of his stare, she turned half away, exposing her profile, and he realized there was no single and precise thing that brought her beauty to focus. The face was oval under a cap of hair the color of polished bronze. Her eyes were set wide, as green and clear as the morning skies of Caladan. The nose was small, the mouth wide and generous. Her figure was good, but scant, tall and with its curves gone to slimness. He remembered that the lay sisters at the school had called her skinny, so his buyers had told him. But that description oversimplified. She had brought a regal beauty back into the Atreides line. He was glad that Paul favored her.
Where's Paul?
Someplace around the house, taking his lessons with Yui.
Probably in the south wing. I thought I heard Yui's voice, but I couldn't take time to look. I came here only to hang the key of Caladan Castle in the dining hall.
Jessica caught her breath, stopped the impulse to reach out to him. Hanging the key. There was finality in that action. But this was not the time or place for comforting.
I saw our banner over the house as we came in.
He glanced at the painting of his father.
Where were you going to hang that?
Somewhere in here.
No.
The word rang flat and final, telling her she could use trickery to persuade, but open argument was useless. Still, she had to try, even if the gesture served only to remind herself that she would not trick him.
My lord, if you'd only...
The answer remains no. I indulge you shamefully in most things, not in this. I've just come from the dining hall where there are...
My lord, please.
The choice is between your digestion and my ancestral dignity, my dear. They will hang in the dining hall.
Yes, my lord.
You may resume your custom of dining in your rooms whenever possible. I shall expect you at your proper position only on formal occasions.
Thank you, my lord.
And don't go all cold and formal on me. Be thankful that I never married you, my dear. Then it'd be your duty to join me at table for every meal.
She held her face immobile, nodded.
Awad already has our own poison snooper over the dining table. There's a portable in your room.
You anticipated this disagreement?
My dear, I think also of your comfort. I've engaged servants. They're locals, but Hawat has cleared them. They're Fremen all. They'll do until our own people can be released from their other duties.
Can anyone from this place be truly safe?
Anyone who hates Harkonnens. You may even want to keep the head housekeeper, the Shadout Mapes.
Shadout, a Fremen title?
I'm told it means well dipper, a meaning with rather important overtones here. She may not strike you as a servant type, although Hawat speaks highly of her on the basis of Duncan's report. They're convinced she wants to serve. Specifically, that she wants to serve you.
Me?
The Fremen have learned that you're Bene Gesserit. There are legends here about the Bene Gesserit.
The Missionaria Protectiva, Jessica thought. No place escapes them.
Does this mean Duncan was successful? Will the Fremen be our allies?
There's nothing definite. They wish to observe us for a while, Duncan believes. They did, however, promise to stop raiding our outlying villages during a truce period. That's a more important gain than it might seem. Hawat tells me the Fremen were a deep thorn in the Harkonnens' side, that the extent of their ravages was a carefully guarded secret. It wouldn't have helped for the Emperor to learn the ineffectiveness of the Harkonnen military.
A Fremen housekeeper. She'll have the all-blue eyes.
Don't let the appearance of these people deceive you. There's a deep strength and healthy vitality in them. I think they'll be everything we need.
It's a dangerous gamble.
Let's not go into that again.
We are committed, no doubt of that.
Jessica went through the quick regimen of calmness, the 2 deep breaths, the ritual thought.
When I assign rooms, is there anything special I should reserve for you?
You must teach me someday how you do that. The way you thrust your worries aside and turn to practical matters. It must be a Bene Gesserit thing.
It's a female thing.
Well, assignment of rooms. Make certain I have large office space next to my sleeping quarters. There'll be more paperwork here than on Caladan. A guard room, of course. That should cover it. Don't worry about security of the house. Hawat's men have been over it in depth.
I'm sure they have.
The Duke glanced at his wristwatch.
And you might see that all our timepieces are adjusted for Erekine local. I've assigned a tech to take care of it. He'll be along presently.
He brushed a strand of her hair back from her forehead.
I must return to the landing field now. The second shuttle's due any minute with my staff reserves.
Couldn't Hawat meet them, my lord? You look so tired.
The good Thufir is even busier than I am. You know this planet's infested with Harkonnen intrigues. Besides, I must try persuading some of the trained spice hunters against leaving. They have the option, with the change of fief. And this planetologist the Emperor and the Landsraad installed as judge of the change cannot be bought. He's allowing the opt. About 800 trained hands expect to go out on the spice shuttle, and there's a guild cargo ship standing by.
My lord.
Yes?
He will not be persuaded against trying to make this planet secure for us, she thought. And I cannot use my tricks on him.
At what time will you be expecting dinner?
That's not what she was going to say, he thought. Ah, my Jessica. Would that we were somewhere else, anywhere away from this terrible place. Alone, the 2 of us, without a care.
I'll eat in the officers' mess at the field. Don't expect me until very late. And, I'll be sending a guard car for Paul. I want him to attend our strategy conference.
He cleared his throat as though to say something else, then, without warning, turned and strode out, headed for the entry where she could hear more boxes being deposited. His voice sounded once from there, commanding and disdainful, the way he always spoke to servants when he was in a hurry.
The Lady Jessica's in the Great Hall. Join her there immediately.
The outer door slammed. Jessica turned away, faced the painting of Leto's father. It had been done by the famed artist Alba during the old Duke's middle years. He was portrayed in matador costume with a magenta cape flung over his left arm. The face looked young, hardly older than Leto's now, and with the same hawk features, the same grey stare. She clenched her fists at her sides, glared at the painting.
Damn you, damn you, damn you!
What are your orders, noble-born?
Jessica whirled, stared down at a knobby, grey-haired woman in a shapeless sack dress of bondsman brown. The woman looked as wrinkled and desiccated as any member of the mob that had greeted them along the way from the landing field that morning. Every native she had seen on this planet, Jessica thought, looked prune-dry and undernourished. Yet, Leto had said they were strong and vital. And there were the eyes, of course, that wash of deepest, darkest blue without any white, secretive, mysterious. Jessica forced herself not to stare. The woman gave a stiff-necked nod.
I am called the Shadout Mapes, noble-born. What are your orders?
You may refer to me as my lady. I'm not noble-born. I'm the bound concubine of the Duke Leto.
Again that strange nod, and the woman peered upward at Jessica with a sly questioning.
There's a wife, then?
There is not, nor has there ever been. I am the Duke's only companion, the mother of his heir designate.
Even as she spoke, Jessica laughed inwardly at the pride behind her words. What was it St. Augustine said? She asked herself. The mind commands the body and it obeys. The mind orders itself and meets resistance. Yes, I am meeting more resistance lately. I could use a quiet retreat by myself. A weird cry sounded from the road outside the house. It was repeated. Sook! Sook! Then, Ikute! Ikute! And then, Sook!
What is that? I heard it several times as we drove through the streets this morning.
Only a water cellar, my lady. But you've no need to interest yourself in such as they. The cistern here holds 50,000 liters, and it's always kept full. Why, you know, my lady, I don't even have to wear my still suit here. And me, not even dead.
Jessica hesitated, wanting to question this Fremen woman, needing data to guide her. But bringing order to the confusion in the castle was more imperative. Still, she found the thought unsettling that water was a major mark of wealth here.
My husband told me of your title, Shadout. I recognized the word. It's a very ancient word.
You know the ancient tongues, then?
Tongues are the Bene Gesserit's first learning. I know the Botani Jib and the Chakopsa, all the hunting languages.
Just as the legend says.
Jessica wondered, why do I play out this sham? But the Bene Gesserit ways were devious and compelling.
I know the dark things and the ways of the Great Mother.
She read the more obvious signs in Mapes's actions and appearance, the petty betrayals.
Misesis pregia, andral tu repera. Tradachik buscacri, misesis peracri.
Mapes took a backward step, appeared poised to flee.
I know many things. I know that you have borne children, that you have lost loved ones, that you have hidden in fear, and that you have done violence, and will yet do more violence. I know many things.
I meant no offense, my lady.
You speak of the legend and seek answers. Beware the answers you may find. I know you came prepared for violence with a weapon in your bodice.
My lady,
There's a remote possibility you could draw my life's blood. But in so doing, you'd bring down more ruin than your wildest fears could imagine. There are worse things than dying, you know, even for an entire people.
My lady!
Mapes appeared about to fall to her knees.
The weapon was sent as a gift to you should you prove to be the one.
And as the means of my death, should I prove otherwise.
Jessica waited in the seeming relaxation that made the Bene Gesserit training so terrifying in combat. Now we see which way the decision tips, she thought. Slowly, Mapes reached into the neck of her dress, brought out a dark sheath. A black handle with deep finger ridges protruded from it. She took sheath in one hand and handle in the other, withdrew a milk-white blade, held it up. The blade seemed to shine and glitter with a light of its own. It was double-edged like a kinjal, and the blade was perhaps 20 centimeters long.
Do you know this, my lady?
It could only be one thing, Jessica knew. The fabled crysknife of Arrakis, the blade that had never been taken off the planet and was known only by rumor and wild gossip.
It's a crysknife.
Say it not lightly. Do you know its meaning?
And Jessica thought, there was an edge to that question. Here's the reason this Fremen has taken service with me, to ask that one question. My answer could precipitate violence or what? She seeks an answer from me, the meaning of a knife. She's called the Shadout in the Chakopsa language. Knife, that's Deathmaker in Chakopsa. She's getting restive. I must answer now. Delay is as dangerous as the wrong answer.
It's a maker.
It was a sound of both grief and elation. She trembled so hard the knife blade sent glittering shards of reflection shooting around the room. Jessica waited, poised. She had intended to say the knife was a maker of death, and then add the ancient word, but every sense warned her now. All the deep training of alertness that exposed meaning in the most casual muscle twitch. The key word was maker. 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 Still, Mapes held the knife as though ready to use it.
Did you think that I, knowing the mysteries of the Great Mother, would not know the Maker?
Mapes lowered the knife.
My lady, when one has lived with prophecy for so long, the moment of revelation is a shock.
Jessica thought about the prophecy, the Shari'ah and the Panoplia Propheticus, a Bene Gesserit of the Missionaria Protectiva dropped here long centuries ago, long dead, no doubt, but her purpose accomplished. The protective legends implanted in these people against the day of a Bene Gesserit's need. Well, that day had come. Mapes returned knife to sheath.
This is an unfixed blade, my lady. Keep it near you. More than a week away from flesh, and it begins to disintegrate. It's yours, a tooth of Shai Halud, for as long as you live.
Jessica reached out her right hand, risked a gamble.
Mapes, you've sheathed that blade unblooded.
With a gasp, Mapes dropped the sheathed knife into Jessica's hand, tore open the brown bodice.
Take the water of my life!
Jessica withdrew the blade from its sheath. How it glittered. She directed the point toward Mapes, saw a fear greater than death, panic come over the woman. Poison in the point? Jessica wondered. She tipped up the point, drew a delicate scratch with the blade's edge above Mapes's left breast. There was a thick welling of blood that stopped almost immediately. Ultra-fast coagulation, Jessica thought. A moisture-conserving mutation. She sheathed the blade.
Button your dress, Mapes.
Mapes obeyed, trembling. The eyes without whites stared at Jessica.
You are ours. You are the one.
There came another sound of unloading in the entry. Swiftly, Mapes grabbed the sheathed knife, concealed it in Jessica's bodice.
Who sees that knife must be cleansed or slain. You know that, milady.
I know it now, Jessica thought. The cargo handlers left without intruding on the great hall.
The uncleansed who have seen a Chris knife may not leave Arrakis alive. Never forget that, my lady. You've been entrusted with a Chris knife. Now the thing must take its course. It cannot be hurried.
She glanced at the stacked boxes and piled goods around them.
And there's work aplenty to while the time for us here.
Jessica hesitated. The thing must take its course. That was a specific catchphrase from the Missionaria Protectiva's stock of incantations, the coming of the Reverend Mother to free you. But I'm not a Reverend Mother, Jessica thought. And then, Great Mother, they planted that one here. This must be a hideous place.
What'll you be wanting me to do first, milady?
Instinct warned Jessica to match that casual tone.
The painting of the old Duke over there. It must be hung on one side of the dining hall. The bull's head must go on the wall opposite the painting.
Mapes crossed to the bull's head.
What a great beast it must have been to carry such a head. I'll have to be cleaning this first, won't I, milady?
No.
But there's dirt caked on its horns.
That's not dirt, Mapes. That's the blood of our Duke's father. Those horns were sprayed with a transparent fixative within hours after this beast killed the old Duke.
Ah, now!
It's just blood. Old blood at that. Get some help hanging these now. The beastly things are heavy.
Did you think the blood bothered me? I'm of the desert, and I've seen blood aplenty.
I see that you have.
And some of it my own. More'n you drew with your puny scratch.
You'd rather I'd cut deeper?
Ah, no. The body's water is scant enough, without gushing a wasteful lot of it into the air. You did the thing right.
And Jessica, noting the words and manner, caught the deeper implications in the phrase, the body's water. Again she felt a sense of oppression at the importance of water on Arrakis.
On which side of the dining hall shall I hang which one of these pretties, my lady?
Ever the practical one, this Mapes, Jessica thought.
Use your own judgment, Mapes. It makes no real difference.
As you say, my lady.
Mapes stooped, began clearing wrappings and twine from the head.
Killed an old duke, did you?
Shall I summon a handler to help you?
I'll manage, my lady.
Yes, she'll manage, Jessica thought. There's that about this Fremen creature, the drive to manage. Jessica felt the cold sheath of the Kriss knife beneath her bodice, thought of the long chain of Bene Gesserit scheming that had forged another link here. Because of that scheming, she had survived a deadly crisis. It cannot be hurried, Mapes had said. Yet there was a tempo of headlong rushing to this place that filled Jessica with foreboding, and not all the preparations of the Missionaria Protectiva, nor Hawat's suspicious inspection of this castellated pile of rocks, could dispel the feeling.
When you've finished hanging those, start unpacking the boxes. One of the cargo men at the entry has all the keys and knows where things should go. Get the keys and the list from him. If there are any questions, I'll be in the south wing.
As you will, my lady.
Jessica turned away, thinking, Hawat may have passed this residency as safe, but there's something wrong about the place. I can feel it. An urgent need to see her son gripped Jessica. She began walking toward the arched doorway that led into the passage to the dining hall and the family wings. Faster and faster she walked until she was almost running. Behind her, Mapes paused in clearing the wrappings from the bull's head, looked at the retreating back.
She's the one, all right. Poor thing.
Yui, 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 goes the refrain. 1,000,000 deaths were not enough for Yui. From A Child's History of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan.
The door stood ajar, and Jessica stepped through into a room with yellow walls. To her left stretched a low settee of black hide and 2 empty bookcases, a hanging water flask with dust on its bulging sides. To her right, bracketing another door, stood more empty bookcases, a desk from Caladan, and 3 chairs. At the windows directly ahead of her stood Dr. Yue, his back to her, his attention fixed upon the outside world. Jessica took another silent step into the room. She saw that Yue's coat was wrinkled, a white smudge near the left elbow as though he had leaned against chalk. He looked, from behind, like a fleshless stick figure in overlarge black clothing, a caricature poised for stringy movement at the direction of a puppet master. Only the squarish block of head, with long ebony hair caught in its silver Suk school ring at the shoulder, seemed alive, turning slightly to follow some movement outside. Again she glanced around the room, seeing no sign of her son, but the closed door on her right, she knew, led into a small bedroom for which Paul had expressed a liking.
Good afternoon, Dr. Yui. Where's Paul?
He nodded as though to something out the window, spoke in an absent manner without turning.
Your son grew tired, Jessica. I sent him into the next room to rest.
Abruptly he stiffened, whirled, with mustache flopping over his purpled lips.
Forgive me, my lady. My thoughts were far away. I did not mean to be familiar.
She smiled, held out her right hand. For a moment she was afraid he might kneel.
Wellington, please.
To use your name like that,
We've known each other 6 years. It's long past time formalities should have been dropped between us, in private.
Yui ventured a thin smile, thinking, I believe it has worked. Now she'll think anything unusual in my manner is due to embarrassment. She'll not look for deeper reasons when she believes she already knows the answer.
I'm afraid I was wool-gathering. Whenever I feel especially sorry for you, I'm afraid I think of you as, well, Jessica.
Sorry for me, whatever for.
Yui shrugged. Long ago he had realized Jessica was not gifted with a full truth-say as his Wana had been. Still, he always used the truth with Jessica whenever possible. It was safest.
You've seen this place, my Jessica. So barren after Kaladin. And the people, those townswomen we passed on the way here, wailing beneath their veils, the way they looked at us.
She folded her arms across her breast, hugging herself, feeling the crysknife there, a blade ground from a sandworm's tooth, if the reports were right.
It's just that we're strange to them. Different people, different customs. They've known only the Harkonnens.
She looked past him out the windows.
What were you staring at out there?
The people.
Jessica crossed to his side, looked to the left toward the front of the house where Yui's attention was focused. A line of 20 palm trees grew there. The ground beneath them swept clean, barren. A screen fence separated them from the road upon which robed people were passing. Jessica detected a faint shimmering in the air between her and the people, a house shield, and went on to study the passing throng, wondering why Yui found them so absorbing. The pattern emerged, and she put a hand to her cheek. The way the passing people looked at the palm trees. She saw envy, some hate, even a sense of hope. Each person raked those trees with a fixity of expression.
Do you know what they're thinking?
You profess to read minds?
Those minds. They look at those trees and they think, there are 100 of us. That's what they think.
Why?
Those are date palms. One date palm requires 40 liters of water a day. A man requires but 8 liters. A palm, then, equals 5 men. There are 20 palms out there, 100 men.
But some of those people look at the trees hopefully.
They but hope some dates will fall. Except it's the wrong season.
We look at this place with too critical an eye. There's hope as well as danger here. The spice could make us rich. With a fat treasury, we can make this world into whatever we wish.
And she laughed silently at herself. Who am I trying to convince? The laugh broke through her restraints, emerging brittle, without humor.
But you can't buy security.
Yui turned away to hide his face from her. If only it were possible to hate these people instead of love them. In her manner, in many ways, Jessica was like his Wana. Yet that thought carried its own rigors, hardening him to his purpose. The ways of the Harkonnen cruelty were devious. Wana might not be dead. He had to be certain.
Do not worry for us, Wellington. The problem's ours, not yours.
She thinks I worry for her. He blinked back tears. And I do, of course. But I must stand before that black baron with his deed accomplished, and take my one chance to strike him where he is weakest, in his gloating moment. He sighed.
Would it disturb Paul if I looked in on him?
Not at all. I gave him a sedative.
He's taking the change well?
Except for getting a bit overtired. He's excited. But what 15-year-old wouldn't be under these circumstances? He's in here.
He crossed to the door, opened it. Jessica followed, peered into a shadowy room. Paul lay on a narrow cot, one arm beneath a light cover, the other thrown back over his head. Slatted blinds at a window beside the bed wove a loom of shadows across face and blanket. Jessica stared at her son, seeing the oval shape of face so like her own. But the hair was the Duke's, coal-coloured and tousled. Long lashes concealed the lime-toned eyes. Jessica smiled, feeling her fears retreat. She was suddenly caught by the idea of genetic traces in her son's features, her lines in eyes and facial outline, but sharp touches of the father peering through that outline like maturity emerging from childhood. She thought of the boy's features as an exquisite distillation out of random patterns, endless cues of happenstance meeting at this nexus. The thought made her want to kneel beside the bed and take her son in her arms, but she was inhibited by Yui's presence. She stepped back, closed the door softly. Yui had returned to the window, unable to bear watching the way Jessica stared at her son. "Why did Wana never give me children?" he asked himself. "I know as a doctor there was no physical reason against it. Was there some Bene Gesserit reason? Was she perhaps instructed to serve a different purpose? What could it have been? She loved me, certainly." For the first time he was caught up in the thought that he might be part of a pattern more involuted and complicated than his mind could grasp. Jessica stopped beside him.
What delicious abandon in the sleep of a child.
If only adults could relax like that.
Yes.
Where do we lose it?
She glanced at him, catching the odd tone, but her mind was still on Paul, thinking of the new rigours in his training here, thinking of the differences in his life now, so very different from the life they once had planned for him.
We do indeed lose something.
She glanced out to the right at a slope humped with a wind-troubled grey-green of bushes, dusty leaves and dry claw branches. The too-dark sky hung over the slope like a blot, and the milky light of the Arakeen sun gave the scene a silver cast light, like the crysknife concealed in her bodice.
The sky is so dark.
That's partly the lack of moisture.
Water! Everywhere you turn here you're involved with the lack of water.
It's the precious mystery of Arrakis.
Why is there so little of it? There's volcanic rock here. There are a dozen power sources I could name. There's polar ice. They say you can't drill in the desert. Storms and sand tides destroy equipment faster than it can be installed if the worms don't get you first. They've never found water traces there anyway. But the mystery, Wellington, the real mystery is the wells that have been drilled up here in the sinks and basins. Have you read about those?
First a trickle, then nothing.
But, Wellington, that's the mystery. The water was there. It dries up, and never again is there water. Yet another hole nearby produces the same result, a trickle that stops. Has no one ever been curious about this?
It is curious. You suspect some living agency? Wouldn't that have shown in core samples?
What would have shown? Alien plant matter? Or animal? Who could recognize it? The water is stopped. Something plugs it. That's my suspicion.
Perhaps the reason's known. The Harkonnens sealed off many sources of information about Arrakis. Perhaps there was reason to suppress this.
What reason? And then there's the atmospheric moisture. Little enough of it, certainly, but there's some. It's the major source of water here, caught in wind traps and precipitators. Where does that come from?
The polar caps?
Cold air takes up little moisture, Wellington. There are things here behind the Harkonnen veil that bear close investigation, and not all of those things are directly involved with the spice.
We are indeed behind the Harkonnen veil. Perhaps we'll...
He broke off, noting the sudden, intense way she was looking at him.
Is something wrong?
The way you say Harkonnen. Even my Duke's voice doesn't carry that weight of venom when he uses the hated name. I didn't know you had personal reasons to hate them, Wellington.
Great Mother, he thought, I've aroused her suspicions. Now I must use every trick my Wana taught me. There's only one solution. Tell the truth as far as I can.
You didn't know that my wife, my Wana, They...
He shrugged, unable to speak past a sudden constriction in his throat. The words would not come out. He felt panic, closed his eyes tightly, experiencing the agony in his chest and little else, until a hand touched his arm gently.
Forgive me. I did not mean to open an old wound.
And she thought, those animals. His wife was Bene Gesserit. The signs are all over him. And it's obvious the Harkonnens killed her. Here's another poor victim bound to the Atreides by a cherem of hate.
I'm sorry. I am unable to talk about it.
He opened his eyes, giving himself up to the internal awareness of grief. That, at least, was truth. Jessica studied him, seeing the up-angled cheeks, the dark sequins of almond eyes, the butter complexion, and stringy mustache hanging like a curved frame around purpled lips and narrow chin. The creases of his cheeks and forehead, she saw, were as much lines of sorrow as of age. A deep affection for him came over her.
Wellington, I'm sorry we brought you into this dangerous place.
I came willingly.
And that, too, was true.
But this whole planet's a Harkonnen trap. You must know that.
It will take more than a trap to catch the Duke Leto.
And that, too, was true.
Perhaps I should be more confident of him. He is a brilliant tactician.
We've been uprooted. That's why we're uneasy.
And how easy it is to kill the uprooted plant, especially when you put it down in hostile soil.
Are we certain the soil's hostile?
There were water riots when it was learned how many people the Duke was adding to the population. They stopped only when the people learned we were installing new wind traps and condensers to take care of the load.
There is only so much water to support human life here. The people know if more come to drink a limited amount of water, the price goes up, and the very poor die. But the Duke has solved this. It doesn't follow that the riots mean permanent hostility toward him.
And guards everywhere, and shields. You see the blurring of them everywhere you look. We did not live this way on Caladan.
Give this planet a chance.
But Jessica continued to stare hard-eyed out the window.
I can smell death in this place. Howat sent advance agents in here by the battalion. Those guards outside are his men. The cargo handlers are his men. There have been unexplained withdrawals of large sums from the treasury. The amounts mean only one thing: bribes in high places. Where Thufir Hawat goes, death and deceit follow.
You malign him.
Malign? I praise him. Death and deceit are our only hopes now. I just do not fool myself about Thufir's methods.
You should keep busy. Give yourself no time for such morbid...
Busy? What is it that takes most of my time, Wellington? I am the Duke's secretary, so busy that each day I learn new things to fear, things even he doesn't suspect I know. Sometimes I wonder how much my Bene Gesserit business training figured in his choice of me.
What do you mean?
He found himself caught by the cynical tone, the bitterness that he had never seen her expose.
Don't you think, Wellington, that a secretary bound to one by love is so much safer?
That is not a worthy thought, Jessica.
The rebuke came naturally to his lips. There was no doubt how the Duke felt about his concubine. One had only to watch him as he followed her with his eyes.
You're right. It's not worthy.
Again she hugged herself, pressed the sheathed crysknife against her flesh, and thinking of the unfinished business it represented.
There'll be much bloodshed soon. The Harkonnens won't rest until they're dead or my Duke destroyed. The Baron cannot forget that Leto is a cousin of the royal blood, no matter what the distance, while the Harkonnen titles came out of the Chom pocketbook. But the poison in him, deep in his mind, is the knowledge that an Atreides had a Harkonnen banished for cowardice after the Battle of Corran.
The old feud.
And for a moment he felt an acid touch of hate. The old feud had trapped him in its web, killed his Wanna, or, worse, left her for Harkonnen tortures until her husband did their bidding. The old feud had trapped him, and these people were part of that poisonous thing. The irony was that such deadliness should come to flower here on Arrakis, the one source in the universe of mélange, the prolonger of life, the giver of health.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that the spice brings 620,000 solaris the decagram on the open market right now. That is wealth to buy many things.
Does greed touch even you, Wellington?
Not greed.
What then?
Futility. Can you remember your first taste of spice?
It tasted like cinnamon.
But never twice the same. It's like life. It presents a different face each time you take it. Some hold that the spice produces a learned flavor reaction. The body, learning a thing is good for it, interprets the flavor as pleasurable, slightly euphoric, and, like life, never to be truly synthesized.
I think it would have been wiser for us to go renegade, to take ourselves beyond the Imperial reach.
He saw that she hadn't been listening to him, focused on her words, wondering, yes, why didn't she make him do this? She could make him do virtually anything. He spoke quickly because here was truth and a change of subject.
Would you think it bold of me, Jessica, if I asked a personal question?
She pressed against the window ledge in an unexplainable pang of disquiet.
Of course not. You're my friend.
Why haven't you made the Duke marry you?
She whirled, head up, glaring.
Made him marry me, but...
I should not have asked.
No. There's good political reason. As long as my Duke remains unmarried, some of the great houses can still hope for alliance. And motivating people, forcing them to your will, gives you a cynical attitude toward humanity. It degrades everything it touches. If I made him do this, then it would not be his doing.
It's a thing my Wanna might have said.
And this, too, was truth. He put a hand to his mouth, swallowing convulsively. He had never been closer to speaking out, confessing his secret role. Jessica spoke, shattering the moment.
Besides, Wellington, the Duke is really two men. One of them I love very much. He's charming, witty, considerate, tender, everything a woman could desire. But the other man is cold, callous, demanding, selfish, as harsh and cruel as a winter wind. That's the man shaped by the father.
Her face contorted.
If only that old man had died when my Duke was born.
In the silence that came between them, a breeze from a ventilator could be heard fingering the blinds. Presently she took a deep breath.
Leto's right. These rooms are nicer than the ones in the other sections of the house.
She turned, sweeping the room with her gaze.
If you'll excuse me, Wellington, I want another look through this wing before I assign quarters.
Of course.
He nodded and thought, if only there was some way not to do this thing that I must do. Jessica dropped her arms, crossed to the hall door and stood there a moment hesitating, then let herself out. All the time we talked, he was hiding something, holding something back, she thought. To save my feelings, no doubt. He's a good man. Again she hesitated, almost turned back to confront Yui and drag the hidden thing from him, but that would only shame him, frighten him to learn he's so easily read. I should place more trust in my friends.
Many have marked the speed with which Muad'Dib learned the necessities of Arrakis. The Bene Gesserit, of course, know the basis of this speed. For the others, we can say that Muad'Dib learned rapidly because his first training was in how to learn. And the first lesson of all was the basic trust that he could learn. It is shocking to find how many people do not believe they can learn, and how many more believe learning to be difficult. Muad'Dib knew that every experience carries its lesson. From The Humanity of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan.
Paul lay on the bed, feigning sleep. It had been easy to palm Dr. Yui's sleeping tablet, to pretend to swallow it. Paul suppressed a laugh. Even his mother had believed him asleep. He had wanted to jump up and ask her permission to go exploring the house, but had realized she wouldn't approve. Things were too unsettled yet. No, this way was best. If I slip out without asking, I haven't disobeyed orders, and I will stay in the house where it's safe. He heard his mother and Yui talking in the other room. Their words were indistinct, something about the spice, the Harkonnens. The conversation rose and fell. Paul's attention went to the carved headboard of his bed, a false headboard attached to the wall and concealing the controls for this room's functions. A leaping fish had been shaped on the wood with thick brown waves beneath it. He knew if he pushed the fish's one visible eye, that would turn on the room's suspensor lamps. One of the waves, when twisted, controlled ventilation. Another changed the temperature. Quietly, Paul sat up in bed. A tall bookcase stood against the wall to his left. It could be swung aside to reveal a closet with drawers along one side. The handle on the door into the hall was patterned on an ornithopter thrust bar. It was as though the room had been designed to entice him. The room and this planet. He thought of the film book Yui had shown him, Arrakis, His Imperial Majesty's Desert Botanical Testing Station. It was an old film book from before discovery of the spice. Names flitted through Paul's mind, each with its picture imprinted by the book's mnemonic pulse: saguaro, burro bush, date palm, sand verbena, evening primrose, barrel cactus, incense bush, smoke tree, creosote bush, kit fox, desert hawk, kangaroo mouse, names and pictures from man's tyrannic past, and many to be found now nowhere else in the universe except here on Arrakis. So many new things to learn about. The spice, and the sandworms. A door closed in the other room. Paul heard his mother's footsteps retreating down the hall. Dr. Yui, he knew, would find something to read and remain in the other room. Now was the moment to go exploring. Paul slipped out of the bed, headed for the bookcase door that opened into the closet. He stopped at a sound behind him, turned. The carved headboard of the bed was folding down onto the spot where he had been sleeping. Paul froze. The immobility saved his life. From behind the headboard slipped a tiny hunter-seeker, no more than 5 centimeters long. Paul recognized it at once. A common assassination weapon that every child of royal blood learned about at an early age. It was a ravening sliver of metal, guided by some nearby hand and eye. It could burrow into moving flesh and chew its way up nerve channels to the nearest vital organ. The seeker lifted, swung sideways across the room and back. Through Paul's mind flashed the related knowledge, the hunter-seeker limitations. Its compressed suspensor field distorted the room to reflect his target. The operator would be relying on motion, anything that moved. A shield could slow a hunter, give time to destroy it. But Paul had put aside his shield on the bed. Lasguns would knock them down, but lasguns were expensive and notoriously cranky of maintenance, and there was always the peril of explosive pyrotechnics if the laser beam intersected a hot shield. The Atreides relied on their body shields and their wits. Now, Paul held himself in near catatonic immobility, knowing he had only his wits to meet this threat. The hunter-seeker lifted another half-meter. It rippled through the slatted light from the window blinds, back and forth, quartering the room. I must try to grab it, he thought. The suspensor field will make it slippery on the bottom. I must grip tightly. The thing dropped a half-meter, quartered to the left, circled back around the bed. A faint humming could be heard from it. Who is operating that thing? Paul wondered. It has to be someone near. I could shout for Yui, but it would take him the instant the door opened. The hall door behind Paul creaked. A rap sounded there. The door opened. The hunter-seeker arrowed past his head toward the motion. Paul's right hand shot out and down, gripping the deadly thing. It hummed and twisted in his hand, but his muscles were locked on it in desperation. With a violent turn and thrust, he slammed the thing's nose against the metal doorplate. He felt the crunch of it, as the nose-eye smashed, and the seeker went dead in his hand. Still he held it, to be certain. Paul's eyes came up, met the open stare of total blue from the shad-out mapes.
Your father has sent for you. There are men in the hall to escort you.
Paul nodded, his eyes and awareness focusing on this odd woman in a sack-like dress of bondsman brown. She was looking now at the thing clutched in his hand.
I've heard of such like. It would have killed me, not so?
Paul had to swallow before he could speak.
I was its target.
But it was coming for me.
Because you were moving.
And he wondered, who is this creature?
Then you saved my life.
I saved both our lives.
Seems like you could have let it have me and made your own escape.
Who are you?
The shut-out Mapes, housekeeper.
How did you know where to find me?
Your mother told me. I met her at the stairs to the weirding room down the hall.
She pointed to her right.
Your father's men are still waiting.
Those will be Hawat's men, he thought. We must find the operator of this thing.
Go to my father's men. Tell them I've caught a hunter-seeker in the house and they're to spread out and find the operator. Tell them to seal off the house and its grounds immediately. They'll know how to go about it. The operator's sure to be a stranger among us.
And he wondered, could it be this creature? But he knew it wasn't. The Seeker had been under control when she entered.
Before I do your bidding, manling, I must cleanse the way between us. You've put a water burden on me that I'm not sure I care to support. But we Fremen pay our debts, be they black debts or white debts. And it's known to us that you've a traitor in your midst. Who it is, we cannot say, but we're certain sure of it. Mayhap there's the hand guided that flesh cutter.
Paul absorbed this in silence. A traitor. Before he could speak, the odd woman whirled away and ran back toward the entry. He thought to call her back, but there was an air about her that told him she would resent it. She told him what she knew, and now she was going to do his bidding. The house would be swarming with Hawat's men in a minute. His mind went to other parts of that strange conversation. Weirding room. He looked to his left, where she had pointed. We Fremen. So that was a Fremen. He paused for the mnemonic blink that would store the pattern of her face in his memory. Prune-wrinkled features darkly browned, blue-on-blue eyes without any white in them. He attached the label. The Shad-out Mapes. Still gripping the shattered Seeker, Paul turned back into his room, scooped up his shield belt from the bed with his left hand, swung it around his waist and buckled it as he ran back out and down the hall to the left. She'd said his mother was someplace down here. Stairs. A weirding room.
What had the Lady Jessica to sustain her in her time of trial? Think you carefully on this Bene Gesserit proverb, and perhaps you will see. Any road followed precisely to its end leads precisely nowhere. Climb the mountain just a little bit to test that it's a mountain. From the top of the mountain, you cannot see the mountain. From Muad'Dib, Family Commentaries by the Princess Irulan.
At the end of the south wing, Jessica found a metal stair spiraling up to an oval door. She glanced back down the hall, again up at the door. Oval? She wondered. What an odd shape for a door in a house. Through the windows beneath the spiral stair, she could see the great white sun of Arrakis moving on toward evening. Long shadows stabbed down the hall. She returned her attention to the stairs. Harsh side lighting picked out bits of dried earth on the open metalwork of the steps. Jessica put a hand on the rail, began to climb. The rail felt cold under her sliding palm. She stopped at the door, saw it had no handle, but there was a faint depression on the surface of it where a handle should have been. Surely not a palm lock, she told herself. A palm lock must be keyed to one individual's hand shape and palm lines. But it looked like a palm lock. And there were ways to open any palm lock, as she had learned at school. Jessica glanced back to make certain she was unobserved, placed her palm against the depression in the door. The most gentle of pressures to distort the lines, a turn of the wrist, another turn, a sliding twist of the palm across the surface. She felt the click, but there were hurrying footsteps in the hall beneath her. Jessica lifted her hand from the door, turned, saw Mapes come to the foot of the stairs. "There are men in the great hall say they've been sent by the Duke to get young Master Paul," Mapes said. "They've the ducal signet, and the guard has identified them." She glanced at the door, back to Jessica. A cautious one, this Mapes, Jessica thought. That's a good sign. "He's in the 5th room from this end of the hall, the small bedroom," Jessica said. "If you have trouble waking him, call on Dr. Yui in the next room. Paul may require a wake shot." Again Mapes cast a piercing stare at the oval door, and Jessica thought she detected loathing in the expression. Before Jessica could ask about the door and what it concealed, Mapes had turned away, hurrying back down the hall. Howard certified this place, Jessica thought. There can't be anything too terrible in here. She pushed the door. It swung inward onto a small room with another oval door opposite. The other door had a wheel handle. An airlock, Jessica thought. She glanced down, saw a door prop fall into the floor of the little room. The prop carried Howard's personal mark. The door was left propped open, she thought. Someone probably knocked the prop down accidentally, not realizing the outer door would close on a palm lock. She stepped over the lip into the little room. Why an airlock in a house? She asked herself, and she thought suddenly of exotic creatures sealed off in special climates. Special climate. That would make sense on Arrakis, where even the driest of off-planet growing things had to be irrigated. The door behind her began swinging closed. She caught it and propped it open securely with a stick Howard had left. Again she faced the wheel-locked inner door, seeing now a faint inscription etched in the metal above the handle. She recognized Gallic words, read, "O man, here is a lovely portion of God's creation. Then stand before it and learn to love the perfection of thy supreme friend." Jessica put her weight on the wheel. It turned left and the inner door opened. A gentle draught feathered her cheek, stirred her hair. She felt change in the air, a richer taste. She swung the door wide, looked through into massed greenery with yellow sunlight pouring across it. A yellow sun? She asked herself. Then, filter glass. She stepped over the sill and the door swung closed behind. A wet planet conservatory, she breathed. Potted plants and low-pruned trees stood all about. She recognized a mimosa, a flowering quince, a sondagi, green-blossomed plenicenta, green and white-striped acaso, roses. Even roses. She bent to breathe the fragrance of a giant pink blossom, straightened to peer around the room. Rhythmic noise invaded her senses. She parted a jungle overlapping of leaves, looked through to the center of the room. A low fountain stood there, small with fluted lips. The rhythmic noise was a peeling, spooling arc of water falling thud-a-gallop onto the metal bowl. Jessica sent herself through the quick, sense-clearing regimen, began a methodical inspection of the room's perimeter. It appeared to be about 10 meters square. From its placement above the end of the hall and from subtle differences in construction, she guessed it had been added onto the roof of this wing long after the original building's completion. She stopped at the south limits of the room in front of the wide reach of filter glass, stared around. Every available space in the room was crowded with exotic, wet-climate plants. Something rustled in the greenery. She tensed, then glimpsed a simple, clock-set servoc with pipe and hose arms. An arm lifted, sent out a fine spray of dampness that misted her cheeks. The arm retracted, and she looked at what it had watered. A fern tree. Water everywhere in this room, on a planet where water was the most precious juice of life, water being wasted so conspicuously that it shocked her to inner stillness. She glanced out at the filter-yellowed sun. It hung low on a jagged horizon above cliffs that formed part of the immense rock uplifting known as the Shield Wall. Filter glass, she thought, to turn a white sun into something softer and more familiar. Who could have built such a place? Leto? It would be like him to surprise me with such a gift, but there hasn't been time, and he's been busy with more serious problems. She recalled the report that many Arikeen houses were sealed by airlock doors and windows to conserve and reclaim interior moisture. Leto had said it was a deliberate statement of power and wealth for this house to ignore such precautions, its doors and windows being sealed only against the omnipresent dust. But this room embodied a statement far more significant than the lack of water seals on outer doors. She estimated that this pleasure room used water enough to support 1,000 persons on Arrakis, possibly more. Jessica moved along the window, continuing to stare into the room. The move brought into view a metallic surface at table height beside the fountain, and she glimpsed a white notepad and stylus there, partly concealed by an overhanging fan leaf. She crossed to the table, noted Hawat's day signs on it, studied a message written on the pad. To the Lady Jessica, may this place give you as much pleasure as it has given me. Please permit the room to convey a lesson we learned from the same teachers. The proximity of a desirable thing tempts one to overindulgence. On that path lies danger. My kindest wishes, Margot, Lady Fenring. Jessica nodded, remembering that Leto had referred to the Emperor's former proxy here as Count Fenring. But the hidden message of the note demanded immediate attention, couched as it was in a way to inform her the writer was another Bene Gesserit. A bitter thought touched Jessica in passing. The Count married his lady. Even as this thought flicked through her mind, she was bending to seek out the hidden message. It had to be there. The visible note contained the code phrase every Bene Gesserit not bound by a school injunction was required to give another Bene Gesserit when conditions demanded it. On that path lies danger. Jessica felt the back of the note, rubbed the surface for coded dots. Nothing. The edge of the pad came under her seeking fingers. Nothing. She replaced the pad where she had found it, feeling a sense of urgency. Something in the position of the pad? She wondered. But Hawat had been over this room, doubtless had moved the pad. She looked at the leaf above the pad. The leaf! She brushed a finger along the undersurface, along the edge, along the stem. It was there. Her fingers detected the subtle, coded dots, scanned them in a single passage. Your son and the Duke are in immediate danger. A bedroom has been designed to attract your son. The H loaded it with death traps to be discovered, leaving one that may escape detection. Jessica put down the urge to run back to Paul. The full message had to be learned. Her fingers sped over the dots. I do not know the exact nature of the menace, but it has something to do with a bed. The threat to your Duke involves defection of a trusted companion or lieutenant. The H planned to give you as gift to a minion. To the best of my knowledge, this conservatory is safe. Forgive that I cannot tell more. My sources are few, as my count is not in the pay of the H. In haste, M.F. Jessica thrust the leaf aside, whirled to dash back to Paul. In that instant, the airlock door slammed open. Paul jumped through it, holding something in his right hand, slammed the door behind him. He saw his mother, pushed through the leaves to her, glanced at the fountain, thrust his hand and the thing it clutched under the falling water. "Paul!" She grabbed his shoulder, staring at the hand. "What is that?" He spoke casually, but she caught the effort behind the tone. "Hunter-seeker. Caught it in my room and smashed its nose. But I want to be sure. Water should short it out." "Immerse it," she commanded. He obeyed. Presently she said, "Withdraw your hand. Leave the thing in the water." He brought out his hand, shook water from it, staring at the quiescent metal in the fountain. Jessica broke off a plant stem, prodded the deadly sliver. It was dead. She dropped the stem into the water, looked at Paul. His eyes studied the room with a searching intensity that she recognized, the B.G. way. "This place could conceal anything," he said. "I've reason to believe it's safe," she said. "My room was supposed to be safe too. Howard said it was a hunter-seeker," she reminded him. "That means someone inside the house to operate it. Seeker control beams have a limited range. The thing could have been spirited in here after Howard's investigation." But she thought of the message of the leaf. Defection of a trusted companion or lieutenant. Not Howard, surely. Oh, surely not Howard. "Howard's men are searching the house right now," he said. "That seeker almost got the old woman who came to wake me." "The shut-out Mapes," Jessica said, remembering the encounter at the stairs. "A summons from your father to—" "That can wait," Paul said. "Why do you think this room's safe?" She pointed to the note, explained about it. He relaxed slightly. But Jessica remained inwardly tense, thinking, a hunter-seeker. Merciful mother. It took all her training to prevent a fit of hysterical trembling. Paul spoke matter-of-factly. "It's the Harkonnens, of course. We shall have to destroy them." A rapping sounded at the airlock door, the code knock of one of Howard's corps. "Come in," Paul called. The door swung wide, and a tall man in Atreides uniform, with a Howard insignia on his cap, leaned into the room. "There you are, sir," he said. "The housekeeper said you'd be here." He glanced around the room. "We found a cairn in the cellar and caught a man in it. He had a seeker console." "I'll want to take part in the interrogation," Jessica said. "Sorry, my lady. We messed him up catching him. He died." "Nothing to identify him?" she asked. "We found nothing yet, my lady." "Was he an Arakeen native?" Paul asked. Jessica nodded at the astuteness of the question. "He has the native look," the man said. "Put into that cairn more than a month ago, by the look, and left there to await our coming. Stone and mortar where he came through into the cellar were untouched when we inspected the place yesterday. I'll stake my reputation on it." "No one questions your thoroughness," Jessica said. "I question it, my lady. We should have used sonic probes down there." "I presume that's what you're doing now," Paul said. "Yes, sir." "Send word to my father that we'll be delayed." "At once, sir." He glanced at Jessica. "It's Howard's order that under such circumstances as these, the young master be guarded in a safe place." Again his eyes swept the room. "What of this place?" "I've reason to believe it's safe," she said. "Both Howard and I have inspected it." "Then I'll mount guard outside here, milady, until we've been over the house once more." He bowed, touched his cap to Paul, backed out and swung the door closed behind him. Paul broke the sudden silence, saying, "Had we better go over the house later ourselves? Your eyes might see things others would miss." "This wing was the only place I hadn't examined," she said. "I put it off to last because—" "Because Howard gave it his personal attention," he said. She darted a quick look at his face, questioning. "Do you distrust Howard?" she asked. "No, but he's getting old. He's overworked. We could take some of the load from him." That'd only shame him and impair his efficiency, she said. A stray insect won't be able to wander into this wing after he hears about this. He'll be shamed that— We must take our own measures, he said. Howard has served 3 generations of Atreides with honour, she said. He deserves every respect and trust we can pay him, many times over. Paul said, When my father is bothered by something you've done, he says, Bene Gesserit, like a swear word. And what is it about me that bothers your father? When you argue with him, you are not your father, Paul. And Paul thought, It'll worry her, but I must tell her what that Mapes woman said about a traitor among us. What are you holding back? Jessica asked. This isn't like you, Paul. He shrugged, recounted the exchange with Mapes. And Jessica thought of the message of the leaf. She came to sudden decision, showed Paul the leaf, told him its message. My father must learn of this at once, he said. I'll radiograph it in code and get it off. No, she said. You will wait until you can see him alone. As few as possible must learn about it. Do you mean we should trust no one? There's another possibility, she said. This message may have been meant to get to us. The people who gave it to us may believe it's true, but it may be that the only purpose was to get this message to us. Paul's face remained sturdily sombre. To sow distrust and suspicion in our ranks, to weaken us that way, he said. You must tell your father privately, and caution him about this aspect of it, she said. I understand. She turned to the tall reach of filter glass, stared out to the southwest where the sun of Arrakis was sinking, a yellowed ball above the cliffs. Paul turned with her, said, I don't think it's Howard either. Is it possible it's Yui? He's not a lieutenant or companion, she said, and I can assure you he hates the Harkonnens as bitterly as we do. Paul directed his attention to the cliffs, thinking, and it couldn't be Gurney. Or Duncan. Could it be one of the sub-lieutenants? Impossible. They're all from families that have been loyal to us for generations, for good reason. Jessica rubbed her forehead, sensing her own fatigue. So much peril here. She looked out at the filter-yellowed landscape, studying it. Beyond the ducal grounds stretched a high-fenced storage yard, lines of spice silos in it with stilt-legged watchtowers standing around it like so many startled spiders. She could see at least 20 storage yards of silos reaching out to the cliffs of the shield wall. Silos repeated, stuttering across the basin. Slowly, the filtered sun buried itself beneath the horizon. Stars leaped out. She saw one bright star so low on the horizon that it twinkled with a clear, precise rhythm, a trembling of light. Blink, 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 blink. Paul stirred beside her in the dusky room. But Jessica concentrated on that single bright star, realizing that it was too low, that it must come from the shield wall cliffs. Someone signaling. She tried to read the message, but it was in no code she had ever learned. Other lights had come on down on the plain beneath the cliffs, little yellows spaced out against blue darkness, and one light off to their left grew brighter, began to wink back at the cliff very fast, blink, squirt, glimmer, blink, and it was gone. The false star in the cliff winked out immediately. Signals. And they filled her with premonition. Why were lights used to signal across the basin? She asked herself. Why couldn't they use the communications network? The answer was obvious. The communinet was certain to be tapped now by agents of the Duke Leto. Light signals could only mean that messages were being sent between his enemies, between Harkonnen agents. There came a tapping at the door behind them, and the voice of Howard's man. All clear, sir, my lady. Time to be getting the young master to his father.